If you take a seat, I'll just introduce him. Can we settle down, please? Thank you. Welcome back. So we are starting the third session, and the context for this is as follows. What you have seen is that our democracy has a very interesting structure. We do have three levels of elected representatives: the MP, the MLA, and in cities the councillor, and in villages the panchayat member. The roles are in theory demarcated. They are supposed to do different things. The primary role of an MP is that of a lawmaker at the national level, as a person who holds the central government to account for its actions and inactions, as Mr. Owaisi was describing in the last session, and the budgetary part to sanction all financial expenditure. That said, the public understanding of this role is very different. And as most MPs that one talks to, especially Lok Sabha MPs, tell us, they are often approached for fixing local level problems such as street lights, potholes, garbage collection. And I guess the re-election prospects of an MP also depends on how he addresses these. Now added to that, the MP has very limited powers in these issues, as most of these issues are under the purview of the local authority. And often the local municipal councillor may even be affiliated to a different political party. In fact, I recall a conversation with an MP who said that the garbage bin near his house was never cleared. The reason was that the municipal council was controlled by the party, by the opposite party, and the local councillor also belonged to that party, and come election, that party would come around and say, why do you want to vote for this MP? He is so ineffective that he can't even get this garbage bin near his house cleared. So given that context, how does an MP manage this dichotomy of managing local expectations and doing the constitutional role as a lawmaker and holding the government account, etc.? So to discuss this issue, we have Dr. Shashi Tharoor. He is a second-time MP from Thiruvananthapuram, which means that he has done this job well, first time to get re-elected. And before this, he has, as everyone knows, has had a distinguished career at the UN. He is a writer, both fiction, non-fiction, regular columnist, commentator. I don't know how he manages to do all that. So he wears many hats. So let me welcome Dr. Shashi Tharoor for this session.
Thanks, Madhav. I'm very impressed to see the Twitter handle up on the screen. I can see that this is a 21st century venture today. Actually, I would really prefer to have an interactive session with all of you, so I'll keep my preliminary remarks fairly brief in order to be able to have a proper exchange. Because I think, in fact, Madhavan's introduction has already summarized the problem very well. We fought for a parliamentary system largely because the nationalist heroes were actually fighting for the rights of Englishmen. They were agitating over decades to have that which the British had deprived them of. And there was a tendency, therefore, to see the Westminster model as the desirable model for us to aim for. And so our nationalists fought for and obtained the Westminster model parliamentary system as the basis for our political form of democracy. As you know, in the parliamentary form, some of these obvious contradictions that Madhavan has just pointed out exist there too, but less so, for two reasons. One is that the constituencies there are relatively tiny. When the parliamentary system came into existence, it was perfectly possible for an MP to meet every single voter. Even today, the average MP represents about 1 lakh persons, which is not a whole lot. I mean, you can meet the majority of them without too much of difficulty. The average Indian MP represents 20 lakh persons, a couple of million people, and therefore the scale of representativity is obviously very different. The second interesting reason for a change, of course, between their way of doing things and ours is the Burkean notion which the British have largely internalized. And once you elect an MP, he doesn't belong just to you, but to the nation. That an MP can go to Parliament and then use his or her intelligence, judgment, reading, knowledge, etc., to come up with a particular point of view on an issue which may have either be of no consequence to the voters of his constituency or may even depart in significant ways from what they would have wished, but that is his prerogative. And that Burkean notion is very, very present, but as you know, is totally absent in the Indian context. A third major difference is the anti-defection law in our country, which was brought about for very good reasons. The good reason being that a point had been reached when Ayaram, Gayaram politics had meant that people were literally crossing the floor from one party to another in quest of the loaves and fishes of office with such appalling frequency in a number of states that it simply wasn't realistic for that to be a valid form of democracy, and the anti-defection law was passed with the best of intentions. But it has meant that we now have a practice that does not exist in this Westminster model as practiced in Britain, which is that literally every bill has a whip attached to it. That is, that every single bill that is brought before Parliament, all the significant parties, obviously in the case of Asad Owaisi, who's just walked in, he's a one-man party, so he can give himself a whip as he sees fit. But for the rest of us, we have no choice but to vote as the party wants us to, because under the anti-defection law, this question of this Burkean notion that I described to you of voting our own conscience is academic, because if we vote against the party's wishes, we can be expelled not only from the party but from Parliament itself. Now, that being the case, our system is really not the kind of Westminster model that our nationalist heroes fondly imagined they were fighting for. But the other challenge is that this Westminster model has been grafted upon an Indian political culture which has understood democracy as merely a way of choosing a different set of middlemen between you and the powers that be. If for centuries before in most parts of the country there was this remote, far-seeing and perhaps often authoritarian ruler, and you needed an intermediary, whether it was a feudal lord, whether it was a mansabdar, or a zamindar, a tribal elder, a caste leader, whatever, somebody to be your intermediary between the power of the state and yourself. Now democracy gave you a way of choosing that intermediary, but the intermediary he or she is still supposed to be. So that a lot of what voters tend to expect from parliamentarians is that the parliamentarians will use their positions to extract benefits from the powers or the system above for the people below. That is very much the traditional Indian way of doing things. So what happens when we have our sessions with our public, with the voters who come to see us in our constituency offices? The British used to call this a surgery. And I still remember a couple of years ago, I was invited by the Speaker to a gathering with a dozen visiting British MPs. And one of them said to me, "I say, old chap, do you have surgeries?" And I said, "Yes, we also meet the public in a..." So she said, "You know, on a busy day, I can see as many as 7 or 8 people." So I said, "On a light day, I'm lucky to get away with seeing 200 people. So, I mean, there is no comparison. And it's not just the size of the constituency, which I've already mentioned, but it's also the fact that the expectations of the public are different. In Britain, I dare say that in most of these surgeries, the bulk of issues that come up are public policy issues. It is equally accurate. Let me only speak from my own experience, though I have reason to believe it's typical of most MPs, that 90 to 95% of the demands that are made on me when I receive members of my public have nothing to do with public policy. They're all about the private interests of the petitioner. So there are people coming for transfers, people coming for promotions, people coming for jobs, especially people coming for jobs. In Kerala, where jobs are scarce, the largest single demand that a constituent has is that the MP get him or his son or daughter a job. Then there is everything from seeking loan waivers, seeking at least interest to be waived on loans, everything. And of course, every single, because Kerala being unfortunately a low employment state, Keralites are working all over the country, but they all want to be back in Kerala. So without exaggeration, I would say that I must have 40 or 50 requests a month from just one constituency alone in Kerala, and there are 20, for people working in the CRPF, the BSF, the Rashtriya Rifles, the NSG, the SPG, even though not the SPG, but pretty much every paramilitary force in India is overflowing disproportionately with Malayalis, and every one of them has an aging father who's suffering from multiple diseases, desperately tired, ill, going blind mother who can't possibly look after the father by himself, a pregnant wife who has to be there, and the need for him therefore to be transferred back from Dantewada or Nagaland or Kashmir or whatever to Kerala. And it's got to a point where this is ultimately a lot of what an MP is expected to do. And having come into Indian politics from outside and having studied and followed Indian politics very closely, but very much with this macro view of being the person who understands or thought he understood the big policy issues, the wood, if not the trees, I realized that retail politics is a very different sort of phenomenon. What the people are voting for is somebody who is most effective at delivering them benefits for themselves. So there are 5% of people who come about potholes on the roads, or ambitious schemes for a new port, or changing the airport, or schemes to find new ways of recycling products that will tar roads instead of just piling garbage disposal. All of these I welcome, and I always take follow-up action. But on the other stuff, there's some profound moral dilemmas. A, is this why I'm in politics? B, if I'm doing all of this, how fair is it to, for example, a better candidate for the same job that I'm recommending this person for, whose only misfortune is that he didn't come to me? Some of these things really raise some troubling issues. And yet, in the political calculus, there is no real debate. The basic message the staff says is you have to basically say yes to every request of the member of the public who comes. You have to try and accommodate them. To some degree and some percentage of it, there is a level of, shall we say, insincerity on both sides. That is, the person makes an unreasonable demand, you fulfill it in a formal way, the letter is sent, neither you seriously believe that that request should be honored, nor does the person who gets the letter actually honor the request, but the constituent is happy because his request has been supported by the MP. There is a famous story told in Kerala of a gentleman who went to see, I can't name the person, I'll embarrass him, because a very, very prominent Kerala politician, still in office, who was told, can you write a letter to Bill Clinton for me? I want to meet him on this scheme that I've got, or whatever. And, you know, in the normal course, if the chap had come to me, I'd have said, don't be silly, this is a waste of your time. Let me see if there's somebody else we can target you to. But, you know, obviously Bill Clinton would even get the letter. But this particular prominent Kerala politician immediately and gladly dashed off a letter to Bill Clinton, knowing full well it would not hurt him at all, but it would make his constituent very happy and seal his vote. Ah, my man wrote to Bill Clinton for. So this is one particular aspect of the challenge. And it's an important thing to understand, because very often people don't realize that this is what a lot of these things are all about. The second thing is also something that Madhavan alluded to briefly, which is the practical problems that in our three-tier system of government, we're supposed to have municipal or panchayat officials for immediate grassroots issues, MLAs for state-level issues, and MPs for central-level issues. Most people, even in a very highly educated state like Kerala, don't understand the difference. So they'll go sometimes to the councillor for a problem, the councillor can't solve it, or the councillor himself will cynically say, look, I don't have enough money to solve this, go to the MP. Or they'll go to the MLA and and the MLA will say, go to the MP, he's so much bigger and more important than me. And then the MP gets the potholes, the garbage clearance, all of these issues, the street lights and so on. The confusion is actually compounded by the fact that we now have the MP LADS, the MP Local Area Development Scheme money, which actually gives MPs the wherewithal to do specific projects which are normally the prerogative of the executive and not of a legislature. So in the UK, as I said, no MP has any money to do any project of that sort. His or her role is purely in Parliament and is to legislate and to debate. In India, the MP is also now genuinely an executing agent. So some of these people coming saying potholes or street lights or whatever are coming knowing full well that if the MP wanted to, he has up to 5 crores available a year to spend in fulfilling these requests of the MP. I get against my 5 crores a year about easily, without exaggerating, about 145 crores worth of projects. And that's on an average. I mean, there certainly is, and there's much more than that. On top of that, 25% of my 5 crores can only be spent on SC/ST projects. So the general projects, which account for the bulk of the requests, I've got to divide among 7 MLA constituencies. And so I end up with about 70 lakhs per constituency, less 25%, so it's about 50 lakhs per constituency. And I tend, therefore, to distribute them on small but useful projects, including street lights in areas that are dark. That's turned out to be actually quite a success. Ambulances for hospitals that don't have them. There are hospitals that have no ambulances, can you believe it? School facilities, computers, smart classrooms, small things which I can do within 5 to 10 lakhs so that I can satisfy 5 people out of the 45 or 50 people in each MLA constituency who've come with projects, all of whom are usually, or most of whom usually are party workers and therefore will hold a grudge against you if you don't oblige them. Now in Kerala the problem is more acute because the MLAs against your 50 lakhs for an MLA constituency, the MLAs have 6 crores. They have the right, in the same way as MP LADS exist, they have 1 crore directly that they can allocate. And then the Kerala government has given them the right to earmark 5 crores within the existing state budget for projects of their choice. So let's say there's 5,000 crores for roads, an MLA can earmark up to 5 crores for roads in his constituency, and they have to be done. So the result is the MLA actually disposes of 12 times the amount the MP does. But if he doesn't want to spend something, so the MP is so much more important than we go to him. And that becomes another problem too, that the MP has to suddenly explain to people that he has less money available than the MLA to do all these things. But because the MP has the wherewithal to do this, the result tends to be to add to the confusion I described earlier, because the perception now is whatever the councillor can't do and the MLA can't do, the MP should be able to do. So to expect the public to parse these differences is, I think, expecting the impossible. As I said, even in an educated state like Kerala, the public is genuinely confused about this, and I can assure you, therefore, that in a place like, well, I don't want to name names, but there are impoverished districts around our country where clearly any sophisticated Burkean analysis of what an MP does is beside the point, because the MPs are seen very much as the people who can deliver specific goodies to people. Now this is the broad sort of dilemma that I wanted to summarize to all of you. There's a lot more I could have said, and I came with a few notes, but I think a discussion like this might be most useful if we can actually talk in terms of actually responding to your questions and what's on your mind. I have for the longest time been an advocate of the presidential system for India, by which I don't just mean a president sitting in Delhi. I mean directly elected chief executives at all levels, where the cities and towns will be run by a directly elected mayor, or a village will be run by a directly elected panchayat chief, and so on. Because not only will that eliminate this imprecision in the process that I've described to you and make things clearer, but it actually would place executive responsibility for specific problems in a discernible specific target, and that person would then have to be accountable, would have to of course be given budget and authority to go with it, but would then be accountable to make things work. Whereas in our system at the moment, it seems to me we have the worst of both worlds. We have a parliamentary system. The parliament is supposed to legislate, but in fact, by and large, we have politicians elected for other purposes, not because they have either a talent or an interest in legislation and public policy. There's a handful, a very relatively small percentage of people who come to Parliament because they want to debate certain issues or because they want to work on certain laws. Most MPs come in the hope or stand for election in the hope of being able to constitute the government. And if they don't constitute the government, there is a certain level of frustration, which, as you've seen in the last 15, 20 years in particular, has often spilled over on the part of the opposition into disruption of Parliament, because since debate is not what they were principally interested in, disruption is as effective for them a way of demonstrating the depth of their convictions than actually standing up and using parliamentary techniques and parliamentary mechanisms. So that's what we've been seeing. I speak as somebody who came with a different set of expectations into this process and has not found it possible entirely to hide some of my frustrations about it. But I don't want to end on that purely negative note. I do want to say, however, that there is one satisfaction you get as an MP in terms of fulfilling the expectations of people, and that is when you are able to use whatever skills and talents you may have to be able to genuinely transform the lives of people in your constituency, not usually through your own executive power, because how much can your 50 lakhs do to change people's lives, but through your ability to get the central government to do significant development work in your constituency. And there I'm particularly, I've had the satisfaction of doing a number of things which I know couldn't have happened without me. I mean, there's one example that I can give you all. There are a few others too, fortunately. But one was there was a bypass road that was absolutely indispensable from Tamil Nadu from Thiruvananthapuram, my constituency, the capital of Kerala, to the Tamil Nadu border. That road had actually been sanctioned 40 years ago before I became an MP. The stones had been laid to demarcate the road, but for whatever reason or various reasons, the project had got stuck and never taken off the ground. And we've had some very distinguished MPs from Thiruvananthapuram, including 2 former chief ministers of Kerala, but nobody had been able to make that thing work. And I decided to take this up as a challenge when I learned about it. And it took me the bulk of my first term lobbying 3 different road ministers, various national highway officials, ensuring at every stage of the process, that is, getting the project sanctioned, getting the funds approved, ensuring that the Gazette notification came out, ensuring that the steps that follow a Gazette notification were actually being done by those responsible. It's very interesting. You notify something in the Government of India Gazette, there's often a time period. In this case, it's 12 months within which the notification will lapse if various things aren't done. Those things, for example, include a survey. Even though it was surveyed 40 years ago, it was surveyed again. So 6 months after the notification, I discovered to my horror the survey hadn't even begun. Why? Because the surveyors had all been transferred to other jobs. I had to then chase a number of state ministers to get these people transferred back. Then when we reached the 9-month mark and the work hadn't been completed because it was proceeding at its usual state-led bureaucratic pace, I had to summon them, read them the Riot Act, threaten them with public humiliation, get them to work Saturdays and Sundays, get it done. I had to chase the Minister of State who was on leave in his home constituency to sign the file in time, and I even telephoned the government press to make sure that it was printed 1 day short of the 12-month deadline so it didn't lapse again. Otherwise, that entire process was impossible. Now, those I did, and I did it as the MP for this constituency, knowing this is going to change millions of lives. When the road comes, it has been tendered and is being constructed now. When the road comes, it will not only massively ease up an existing traffic problem on another highway which is now being congested with traffic that doesn't need to be there, but it will also develop an entire swathe of the southern tip of the Indian peninsula. And so I know I can look back, even if I've done nothing else, I've done something which for 40 years no one had been able to do. Now, is that the job of an MP? You can, as I said, have a Burkean debate about whether that should be the job of an MP. But since extracting benefits from central ministries is what the people expect you to do, to be able to point to this and say, I mean, you said you managed to get re-elected despite everything. That's one of the reasons, was that I won every single MLA constituency along the stretch of that road because I knew I had brought that road after so many years. So, there's always political benefit as well, but there's also the satisfaction of leaving behind something that changes people's lives. Thanks very much. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Let me just ask some people at the back, because
I must have left my glasses
Venkat
behind somewhere.
Thank you for that very informative speech, sir.
Thank you.
I just have a question for you.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a demand from your constituency residents to discuss any bill that's been pending in Parliament where you are required to vote, to tell them what the bill is all about, and do they ever tell you how they would like you to vote?
Very interesting question, because that is exactly the whole that Burkean dilemma that I described to you. The answer is no, but a qualified no. That is, as a general proposition, people, the kinds of people who show up at my office in the constituency or come to my home and so on, they're very, very rarely, in fact, I would say almost never raised issues involving legislation. Partly it's also because, of course, in our country, the laws, the public isn't aware when a law is about to be introduced. They read about it in the papers when the law has been introduced, and often when it's already being debated that week in Parliament. So they don't get a chance, really. I mean, Thiruvananthapuram is literally as far as you can fly from Delhi without falling into the water. So it's not like being the MP for Chandni Chowk, in which case I'm sure the constituents can knock on your door anytime. When I'm in Delhi, I get a handful of appointments a day, and not all of them are from constituents. So I don't get that kind of immediate pressure. So I don't entirely blaming the constituents. But sometimes when there's a long-running legislative issue, that argument doesn't apply. So, for example, have people come to me in my constituency saying, why do you take the stand on GST, for example? The answer is no, they haven't come. Now, there can be special interests on specific issues. And certainly, when I decided to introduce the bill to decriminalize certain kinds of human behavior, Section 377, I got a call from a very, very, very important, influential religious leader who lives in my constituency, who is actually a very major national figure, saying to me, we like you, why are you doing this? I mean, the subtext was very clear. If you do this, we may not like you so much anymore. And I said, because this is about our constitutional freedoms. This is not about what you think it is. And after a few minutes exchange, he said, we'll talk later. That later hasn't happened yet. But it may be academic, since in any case the BJP took care of my likability on this issue by disposing of it summarily. But no, as a general proposition, I don't even know many of my colleagues have a different experience. But for me, in these 7.5 years now, 7 years, no one has actually really lobbied me from the constituency, as a constituency point of view, on a pending legislation that matters. Yes, I do have letters on budget for every year. In the 6 months before the budget, I'll get the Cooperative Bank Employees Union, the Life Insurance Agents Association, the Homeopathic Medicine Distributors, you name it, everyone, they're all active in Kerala and in the constituents, and they'll write to me. Some of my other constituents, other MPs will have rubber growers writing to them, or, fish workers writing to them. Every economic group has an interest in what goes into the budget, and we always faithfully represent their points of view. That's the one exception, if you want. If you consider the budget to be a piece of legislation, that certainly we get input. But apart from that, no. Will somebody play traffic cop and decide who should get the mic to ask questions? Amongst other things, I left my glasses behind, so I can't see at a distance. There's a little blur at the back. I apologize. So,
yes,
I thought I left it at my seat, but I don't have.
Sir,
Yeah.
MP and MLA has its own pocket fund, MP-led or MLA-led, as you have said, for the development of local areas concerned.
Yeah.
At the same time, local bodies are lacking funds in entire India, panchayat or whatever.
Exactly.
Right? So what is the logic of local body, first? And second, which is interlinked, if there is a logic of local governance and local body in India, then why MP or MLA is assigned to do the local jobs, toilet or sanitations?
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, there is an MP, Manish Tiwari, who actually, as a lawyer, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, arguing for the abolition of these funds. But the Supreme Court upheld MP lads as a legitimate, shall we say, use of legislators' power, and therefore it exists. And I have to admit that since it exists, it is beneficial because it's the only thing, very often, that an MP can point to in many parts of its constituency. You know, I can do a big development project like that National Highway bypass, or bring a major port or whatever, but these things are physically located in one place, or in the case of the road, it cuts across, let's say, I have 7 MLA constituencies, it cuts across 3 of them. What about the other 4? What do I point to there, right? I mean, obviously there are things. I have brought railway stops, and I've brought a specialty hospital, and so on and so forth, but these are one thing. Whereas with the MP funds, I can say, look, I brought you a tube well here, I got your drinking water supply solved out there, I got street lights installed here, I beautified that beach there, etc., etc. Because I do small projects, I end up with, God knows, about 250 different things to point to that I've done in the course of a 5-year term. And that is something that I could not do without the MP lads funds. So if you like, it's an exercise in distributing responsibility and the funds that go with that responsibility. But I would agree with you 100% that whatever we are given should be exceeded by the funds available to the local area authority itself. In the rural areas, the Gram Panchayat should really be given much, much more funds to spend than the MP. I find it embarrassing when people from the Gram Panchayats come to me saying, you know, can you fix this mud track which we want you to tar for us, or can you do that, because we don't have the money in the budget for it. Imagine a Gram Panchayat that can't even tar a mud track in the Gram. So, and in Kerala, it's a particular problem. We don't benefit much from the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana because all of our roads are too narrow. Kerala being as densely populated as it is, the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana only applies for Gram Sadaks that are 8 meters broad, and most Kerala village roads are 3, 4, maximum 5 meters. So they really need the MP to pay money to tar their roads because the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana won't do it for them. This kind of thing becomes a problem, and I really believe that your question is totally justified. We must give the local bodies much more authority. In many ways, I feel it would be fixed if my solution of locally but directly elected chief executives were adopted. What we should be seeing throughout the country, where we have far too much dispersed authority, where the checks and balances make any executive action meaningless and impossible, what we really ought to see is a town mayor or a village chief with an absolutely viable budget, with the authority to allocate and spend that budget, and a finite term of office, running on a program and being judged by the voters for fulfilling that program. That, in my view, would actually correspond far better to the real expectations of our voters than this present system, where, to borrow a phrase from a well-known author, what the MPs are doing is really tugging at the memories of the welfare state. That is not what we should be doing, in my view. If we had directly empowered, adequately budgeted chief executives, we could be allowed to concentrate on policy debates and legislation, but that's not what we're asked to do. Ironically, the present government is actually taking this even further in the wrong direction by keeping on piling on new schemes that they want us to fund out of our MP lads programs without giving any additional money. The most egregious example of this is the Pradhan Mantri's Adarsh Gram Yojana. Now, the Adarsh Gram Yojana seeks to create ideal villages, and every MP has been commanded to adopt 2 villages under the scheme. I said, fine, I'll adopt a village, but where's the money? So they said, no money, you have to do it out of existing funds and existing schemes. I said, if existing funds and existing schemes were not enough to make these villages into Adarsh villages, why will your calling them so suddenly make us do it? It either needs more money, either for us or for the villages. But if you're not giving either, then I'm not quite sure what's the point of this exercise. But it's so funny, every time a new issue comes up, from Adarsh Gram to Swachh Bharat, you will find some minister standing up encouraging MPs to use MP funds for the purpose. I mean, this is becoming also a bit of a joke. It can't be a substitute for the executive responsibilities of the official authorities, whether national, central, state or local.
Let me be the typical traffic cop and jump the queue and ask you a question and break the law.
Okay.
So given that a lot of the public expectations and you fulfill that by addressing those needs, why do many MPs, including yourself, spend a lot of time and effort in looking at legislation, in doing the detailed debate, which we have seen many people do? What's the incentive? Why do you do it?
In my case, it's genuine intellectual interest. I actually, when I sought to get elected to Parliament, I assumed that one of the things I'd have a chance to play a role in, the two things I expected to be able to do were, one, get engaged in policy debates on subjects that I had something to say about, and to get engaged in the drafting of legislation. I discovered certainly when I was in government that neither was available to me. In government, you can only speak on your own ministry's work, and that too, if you have the misfortune of being an MOS. Some of you may remember my notorious remark a few years ago that being an MOS is like standing in a cemetery. There are a lot of people under you, but no one's listening. Essentially, if you have a cabinet minister who's doing everything, and unless the cabinet minister is of a very secure and generous disposition, you will twiddle your thumbs throughout your tenure as an MOS and never speak in Parliament. So that can be a genuine challenge. The second issue with being in government is that when you're not a minister but you're on the backbenches, you may not actually speak against, obviously, the legislation that your own government is piloting. So that again means that the only speechifying you're doing is in support of policies you didn't actually help devise. So being in opposition, I greeted with great enthusiasm. I said, here's my chance to say what I really think and do what I really want. Now, it's true up to a great extent, especially when our party has sadly been reduced to 45 members. Naturally, that means there are fewer of us around whom the leadership can tap to participate in this or that. And so there are opportunities to speak. But at the same time, there are similar constraints of policy. And when there are not, the only recourse is the private member's bill, where you can do all the homework and the legwork and write a bill, but the chances of its adoption or passage are very slender. So you really have to have the satisfaction of knowing you've placed something valuable on the national agenda, even if it's actually not going to ever become law. Now, as you know, 90-odd% of private members' bills that are introduced are not actually debated in the length of time available to a typical session. There's only every alternate Friday that private members' bills come up. So, in fact, a bill may be successfully introduced, which my 377 bill was not. It was killed at the introduction stage. But it can be introduced and then never debated, which may be also frustrating. But on the other hand, if it does come up for debate, in most cases, the only way it actually gets to see any prospect of an effective adoption is if the government of the day says, listen, don't proceed with the bill, we will take your bill and make it a government bill. That's happened in a large number of cases. In fact, in the vast majority of those private members' bills that have become law, that's the way it's become law. It's been through governments. Only 14 private members' bills in the entire history of our parliament have passed and become law as private members' bills. And the last one was in 1970. Now, we may be in the process of seeing a 15th because Tiruchi Shiva's bill on the rights of transgender persons has passed the Rajya Sabha. The debate began in the Lok Sabha. It hasn't concluded, but it carries on into the next session. So it's possible that unless the ruling party, you see, in the Lok Sabha, the ruling party always has a majority. That's how they become the ruling party, right? So in the Lok Sabha, if the ruling party decides they don't want a particular piece of legislation or they are opposed to it, there's nothing any set of private members can do to pass it. But it's in those situations where the ruling party doesn't care enough. They don't care enough to want to adopt the bill, but they don't care enough to want to oppose the bill, and some of the members vote and some don't show up and some vote against and so on, then you have a chance of passage. And at the moment, Mr. Shiva's bill seems to be one that just might get through. So that would be, if it happens, a 15th bill. But with those cases apart, you do it, as it were, for the love of the game. This is something that's important. And now you can use social media to publicize your efforts. You can let people know. You can start a national conversation, even if you can't get a parliamentary debate.
I think you're pressed for time, so what I'll do is, you have 5 more minutes?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
I'll take 3 quick questions, and to whatever extent you can answer together.
Okay.
So we'll take the questions together for the sake of time.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Tharoor, you're a great supporter of presidential form of government, or at least some sort of a directly elected chief executive. We all wish that your party fields you, but that is least likely.
Least likely.
Could you imagine what will happen when Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Modi is in the race?
Look, I mean, I think they actually represent 2 very interestingly divergent strands of leadership. Mr. Modi is very much the man on a white horse kind of leader. The sort of big hero who knows all the answers and is going to deliver all the solutions by himself. And Mr. Gandhi is one of these guys who says, I don't know all the answers. I'm not even sure I know all the questions, but I'll listen to you and you tell me what's on your mind, what you want me to do, and I've got this whole bunch of people around me going to help me do it for you. That, I think, is the choice the nation's going to get in 2019. Now, if the nation believes that the first style has worked effectively for them in the first 5 years, then they may opt for that kind of directive leadership. And if the nation believes that it hasn't worked out so well and that therefore they need to try something different, a consensual, collaborative, cooperative style might work well. And of course, it's also very much a style that is apt for the coalition era into which we may well be returning in 2019. But that, I think, is the choice. But again, since we don't have a presidential system, the question is academic. It's really going to be a parliamentary system, and that's where the talk of coalition governments comes up.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, not the legislation itself, but maybe the rules and bylaws that are created thereafter. So the Subordinate Legislation Committee is one way that legislators can engage in giving recommendations for rules. But I mean, there's so much diversity in the kind of bylaws that they consider. There's hardly any time for proper consideration. Do you see that there's any way that legislators can engage in this process more, considering it's so important?
It's a very good question, very good question. I've been wondering about this. I don't know how it would be done, because you see, a law or a draft law has to go through a committee process where indeed inputs are received. Even then it's not binding, as you know. The ministry can take the suggestions of the standing committee into account or reject them. But once the law is passed, the rules, regulations that are written to implement the law tend to be beyond the purview. I know there is a committee on subordinate legislation, but often, as far as I'm aware, MPs have very little say in the minutiae of a lot of these things, which means that sometimes a year, 2 years after the law has been operating, you discover a problem that has really affected your constituency, because they come to you and say, look, we have this problem because of this law that you voted for, etc. It's created this problem for us. And then you have to start lobbying the ministry concerned to either rewrite that regulation, which it has the capacity to do, or to apply it differently. Can we bring this into the parliamentary process? It's a tough one, because strictly speaking, the logic of the standing committee's consideration is it's considering something that is going to be brought to the floor of the House. That same logic doesn't apply when you're talking about rules and regulations relating to a law that's already been passed. It doesn't come again to the floor of the House, so what is the committee's role? I'm not sure that legally, constitutionally, one can find a formula, but I agree with you that there is a need.
One last question. Yes.
Hi, Varun.
Thank you for elaborating upon the dichotomy that exists between the constitutional role and the people's expectation of MP. So I wanted to ask you that, do you think there exists a dichotomy between party high command's expectation out of you and people expectation out of you? Let's say the party high command wants you to disrupt the parliament, come to the well and raise a placard, and people's expectation on the constitutional expectation out of you is to debate and legislate. So how do you decide upon that? And the question that, I mean, on this...
I think you know the answer already. You're asking this. This is a mischievous question. I mean, the fact is that in the system we have, I talked about the presidential system briefly. In the American system, for example, individual senators or congressmen can and very frequently do buck their party's official stand on issues. Here we can't, and we have an anti-defection law that makes it very clear that whatever the party wants you to do, you do, or the party can essentially kick you out of parliament. You've taken a lot of trouble to get elected, and you tell yourself, your people have voted for you for 100 things. If on one thing you're going to do something that you can't really happily defend in front of them, still the other 99 require you to remain viable and functioning in parliament, and therefore you go along. Still, there are difficulties, and this one is a particular problem for me. I have never entered the well of the House. I've never shouted or raised a slogan. But nor have I ostentatiously sat in my seat when my colleagues are protesting. It would be an act of disloyalty to them. So what I've tended to do is the worst of both worlds, if you like. I get up from my seat and walk to the aisle, and I stand there to show my solidarity with them, but I don't enter the well and I don't shout slogans. Whether I am therefore equally guilty of disruption, I don't know, but on that one notorious occasion when the speaker named various people of disrupting, even though I was standing in the aisle, I was not named. So I think she clearly considers disruption to involve an active act of standing in the well and shouting, which I have not done. But yes, I mean, this is something that when a party decides collectively to undertake an action, every party MP is expected to go along with it, and it's... We've seen some very distinguished and venerable people, far more senior than myself, who have been caught in the same dilemma and have found similar means of coping with it, not just in the Lok Sabha, but also in the Council of Elders, that is the Rajya Sabha. So anyway, the party prevails. Thank you all very much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for an excellent lecture. Thanks a lot.
No, it must be here or at the T or here, but I can't see it. So maybe it's on my...
Dr. Tharoor seems to have misplaced his glasses, so if anybody has seen them somewhere, please let me know. And please remain seated. We'll...
Ask Varun about 377. Why should only one MP be asked questions and put him in an awkward position with this party? I'm going to support you.
Thanks, Dr. Tharoor. And so we'll smoothly go into the next session. Please remain seated. There'll be other opportunities to take a selfie with Dr. Tharoor, I'm sure. So the last session of the day, we are discussing how an MP acts as a connect between the people and parliament. So an MP is expected to reflect the hopes and aspirations of the people he or she represents. Sometimes, being a member of a large political party, and we had Mr. Owaisi earlier, who was a single member party, so he doesn't have this particular challenge, but sometimes being a member of a large political party can be a handicap, as one has to compete for the opportunity to speak in parliament. And there may be occasions when the official party line may not be congruent to the interests of the people in the constituency, which was the last question raised in the last session. So how does an MP negotiate these and other such challenges when the MP is trying to reflect what, as represent the people and reflect their hopes, aspirations, etc. in parliament? So to speak on this, we have Mr. Firoz Varun Gandhi. Everyone knows him, so I won't talk too much about him. There is a CV in the folder which has an error or by us. He is the National General Secretary of the BJP and not the National Secretary as we have written there. He is a second-term MP. He now represents Sultanpur in UP. Among other things, he is one of the most prolific columnists among MPs, writes columns for several national dailies, He has written 2 volumes of poetry. Please welcome Mr. Gandhi.
I was starving for about 3 months before I took that. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Chakshuji, for giving me the opportunity to speak. The last time my parliamentary record was talked about was when I was kicked off a committee for lack of attendance. So I'm hoping that a positive performance here evens the score somewhat. When I joined Parliament, I thought about my journey, my parliamentary journey. It started somewhat like this. I went to Oxford to do an interview. And in Oxford, the procedure is a bit strange because the people who are interviewing you often have nothing to do with what you're interviewing for. So he was a professor of Russian literature, and he said, in your UCAS form, you've got a personal statement. And he said, you said you like reading. That's very interesting. What do you like reading? And I thought, I must say something really fancy. So I said, I like reading literary criticism. I had no idea what it meant. So he said, wow, that's interesting. Who's your favorite literary critic? And I said, Henry David Thoreau, because I just finished reading on Walden Pond. And he looked at me a bit suspiciously, and he said, but you know, Henry David Thoreau wasn't a literary critic. And I looked out of the window at my future going up in flames, and I said, Professor, his entire life was an act of literary criticism. And then he looked at me squarely, and he said, Mr. Gandhi, you're either going to be a great man one day, and he paused, or you're going to be a spectacular bullshitter your whole life. The year after that, I went to Oxford. I got into LSE. I went to Oxford and I said, Professor, how do I go forward from here now that I know it's the latter? He said, I think you should find a place in the Indian Parliament. So here I am. You know, on a serious note, I don't know what PRS has asked me to speak on, but I've just noted down a few points as to, you know, my views on my 7 years in Parliament. And it's been a bit of a mixed bag, really. You know, because when I joined Parliament, I realized that there hadn't been a single Parliament without a member of my family in it from 1952 onwards. And so, not just my political journey, but all through my life, in some sense, Parliament has been a part of me. And my mother has won elections. I think she's won 8 of them. She's lost elections. And I remember, you know, how grueling the procedure is to get to Parliament. And therefore, when we enter Parliament, the question is, are we really trained to be parliamentarians? Are we trained? Are we skilled? Are we retooled enough for the challenges of being not just a parochial representative of a constituency somewhere, but are we, you know, in the Burkean sense, are we really parliamentarians who respond to the challenges of the country as a whole? And the truth is, I don't think we are. Parliament, when you look at the historicity of the Indian parliamentary evolution, you'll find that the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges before our parliamentary forefathers, was the challenge of representation, of being representative enough. And I think that we've taken this very seriously and responded to it adequately and positively. But I think that what we have done is we've obsessed about this, and we've turned Parliament from an arena of excellence, which it should be and which it is in parts of the world, into an arena of politicization, and politics at its highest and sometimes most divisive level. So the challenge is really whether one can be representative, which one has to be and should be, and be active. You know, when I hear, for instance, we have 0 hour, and sometimes I'll ask questions. The last time I intervened was on bonded labor. And I remember the guy sitting next to me was a young MP from UP. He said, why on earth do you ask these bizarre, interventions? You're never going to get any votes out of all this. So, and when I listen to other people's interventions, 95% of them are, there was a trader that was shot in this bazaar in my constituency. Can you dissolve the UP government and put president's rule there? I mean, they're all the same. So I'm often amazed by this. The thing is that, I often think that, let's say I had a particular interest. Let's say I had an interest in labor reform, right? When I joined parliament, I would have to be a particularly uninteresting person to have that interest. But let's say I had that interest and I came to parliament, where would I find the expertise to really chart my path of excellence on that particular policy trajectory? I wouldn't, right? Could I perhaps get put on the Labour Committee? Maybe. As Dr. Tharoor says, party is king. I often ask my mother, I said, you are one of the most well-known environmentalists / animal rights activists in India. How come nobody ever makes you environment minister? Or, minister in charge of animal rights? Or when you're in opposition, chairman of that committee? I don't have an answer to that question. I was in the Defense Committee last time. I was an MP. And I was very excited about it. And I thought that maybe an ex-military man or somebody with some serious intel or experience would head the committee. It was interestingly headed by Satpal Maharaj, not so much in the military intel department. When I was reading about the death penalty for an article I wrote, I came across a name, and the name was Professor Shibban Lal Saxena. And in the Constituent Assembly debates, I thought, what an interesting guy. Who is he? And I found that he was an independent MP from Maharajganj in 1952. Now, it's very, very difficult to become an independent MP in 1952, much less a Kayast from Maharajganj. So today, nobody from that community can probably even fight a ward membership over there. So there was a time in India where excellence was rewarded. But we've come a long way since then, right? So to just follow the trajectory without passing any judgment, Maulana Azad's constituency, which was represented in 1952, Rampur, then came to be represented by Jaya Pradaji. And Pandit Nehru's constituency was represented by Atiq Ahmed, who had the distinction of having, I think, 60 or 70 murder cases on him. But I just found it, so without passing judgment, the point is the way in which we've evolved. Is it more representative? Is it, I don't know, these are questions that haunt me. The point is that it is a cage of identity politics that we're trapped in. And we're trapped in it tighter and tighter as time goes on. And as a young person, it disturbs me. Because when I go to my constituency, the truth is nobody is interested in a member of parliament as a policy framework person, as a framer of policy, as anybody who's got anything to say on a bill that they've worked on or proposed or been part of. I mean, let's look at America, for instance, right? You've got somebody like Bernie Sanders, who's captured the imagination of a lot of young people in America. And why has he done that? Because he's got a consistent voting record that is progressive and liberal and interesting. But if I were to distinguish myself from from Sakshi Maharaj in my party, how could I possibly do so? Because there are whips on every single legislation. So let's say I want to support Dr. Tharoor's legislation on decriminalizing homosexuality, which I wanted to, by the way. But no, it's true. But the truth is that I was told that there is a party diktat on that, and you must obey it. So I did the next best thing, which is I didn't show up to vote, because I thought that was me in my small way showing solidarity. But the fact is that, look, India has gone in 100 or 150 years from medievalism to postmodernism, right? And this is reflected in Parliament most of all, not in the medieval MPs and the postmodern MPs, but in the way that perhaps we've gone from medievalism to postmodernism without bothering to create a civilization in between. And I think it is that gulf, it is that gap that is really the most challenging fact for us. As I said, why can't we, how do we look at ourselves as a country, as leaders? Do we look at ourselves as part of the collective, or do we look at ourselves as individuals? I'm sad to say that this politics of being representative has made almost all of us look at ourselves as part of a collective, forwards, backward, religion, region, caste. So what my point is that ultimately what we need going forward is some kind of renaissance of Indian parliamentary individualism, where an MP can actually stand for something, where he can go out, have a serious voting record that can be judged, and really, be knocked on that or be celebrated on that. But when we go to our constituency, what do people want from us? People don't want to know. If I give a speech like this to my workers or constituents, and say that this is the policy legislation that I have in mind, they will all probably nod off to sleep. And they will say to me कि ये सब तो ठीक है, लेकिन ये नाली बना दो, ये सड़क 2 किलोमीटर की बना दो, और ये खड़ंजा लगा दो, and that will be the end of that. The truth is that, without sounding disparaging, have our people reached that evolutionary level above starvation, above hunger, above agrarian distress, above a marginal existence, where they really care about these things? The truth is that they haven't. I donated my entire parliamentary salary to farmers who've committed suicide in UP, and I've been going from district to district, and what we do, I just want to take 1 minute of your time because I consider it quite valuable. So I'm going to Allahabad next month, the end of this month. So what I do is, not only do I give, say, 5 lakhs or 6 lakhs from my own money, we collect the elite from that particular area, and let's say they want me to come and have a picture with them, or they want me to go and have a cup of tea at their place. I say, I'm happy to do so, but this is the data of 30 more farmers or 50 more farmers who will certainly commit suicide because of indebtedness in the next year or so. So how can you help them? And so then people say, okay, we'll give 50,000, we'll give 1 lakh, and we have collected from Muradabad. I gave 5 lakhs, we collected 17 lakhs more, and we were able to help 28 families. But the truth is not that. The truth is that ultimately, I wanted to talk about this in Parliament in this session, to ask more MPs to join in, make it bipartisan, make it a movement. I didn't even get an opportunity to talk about it. And the thing is, when you go to the Business Advisory Committee, right, which I'm not a member of, most of the stuff that comes out of it in terms of topics to be discussed, because it has to be fully, consensus-based, is boring, generic, repetitive stuff that every time we discuss, so it's like we're just self-congratulatory, amplified versions of ourselves, right? So every session will have one debate on Japanese encephalitis. I've been an MP for 7 years. Every single session has had a speech. Yogi Adityanath will give the speech. Everybody will listen, and then 2 or 3 people will speak. The point is, I've never ever heard anybody from the health ministry address it. I've never seen the health minister be there. I've never heard any policy analyst be there, right? And so ultimately, what has happened about Japanese encephalitis? Yes, it is a pandemic. Yes, it needs to be addressed. But every parliament session, in the same way, with the same people, I don't know. I mean, so the point is that, see, my point is that ultimately, let's look at the parliamentary processes, right? Let's look at the private member bills. I mean, all of you know this. 4% of private member bills introduced, 4% have been discussed in Parliament, right? And how many private member bills have been passed? 14 have been passed since 1970, right? So ultimately, what is the key? The key is when parliamentarians are not incentivized for excellence, they will not excel. They will not be serious policy people. They will not do their homework because they know that A, that doesn't sell with the electorate, and nobody rewards you for being a good parliamentarian, quote unquote, right? But more importantly, the institution of parliament and its internal processes do not incentivize you to actually come forth and excel in that manner. So my point is that, and the thing is that when we have parliamentary standing committees, right, most of them, frankly, that I've been a part of, haven't really done much. But there are parliamentary standing committees that have put forth interesting ideas. I came across one which was the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Personnel, Public Grievances, Law and Justice, which has just suddenly sought to encourage simultaneous elections to the Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabhas, and also put forth a tribal judicial system for the Northeast in conjunction with traditions over there. But my point is that these are islands of excellence. They are not the norm, right? So the fact is that while we have to congratulate the media, because in shining light on these institutions, they have given them somewhat of a second wind, the fact is that, views need to be translated into action, and that hasn't happened. Lastly, I just want to say that, the process of a normal common MP getting his voice heard in Parliament on an issue of his choice. I wanted to speak on one issue this time, and that issue was medical debt. In this country, 30 million people go into poverty every year because of medical debt. And I had done some homework on this, I'd written a couple of articles on this, and I wanted to speak on it. And I went to the concerned people about 4 times, and each time I was told, I'm sorry, today we're debating the agrarian crisis for the 99th time, and we're debating, demands for grants and this, that, the other. But the fact is that how much liberty and independence do I really have to put forth my voice? I have very little within the party system. I have even less within the parliamentary framework. So the point is, how do I get this going? How do I get it off the ground? So I just want to say that we need to expand the narrative, and, as Burke said, he said something which I remember, that just 2 things I want to lastly say. One is, there's a principal-agent conflict, right? So the fact is that Parliament is the agent and the people of India are the principal. But in any society, the agent has to serve the principal. But in this field, what we see is we see agents using the power of the principal to actually benefit themselves. And that is the conflict before us. Because the only time that I really see a lot of people excited is when we talk about an increase in MP local area development scheme funds, or increase in salary, or increase in holidays, or what have you. But the fact is, when we're talking about the most vulnerable sections of society, I don't really see that kind of spark, that kind of excitement that I saw in the Constituent Assembly debates, in those debates of 52, 57, 62, etc. And those were the debates where we really saw personalities coming to the fore. Now it's almost like we're not leading people, we're not dreaming big for the people, we're just pandering, right? Pandering to the mob, pandering to the collective, pandering to our constituents. I mean, how many people have the guts really to go to their constituents and say, listen, do this, it's going to be good for you, it's going to be good for your children, it's going to help them open their mind. Not a lot of people, to be honest. So the fact is that, as Burke said, he said that, we're not a Congress of ambassadors from different and hostile interests, and we can't just act as agents and advocates against other agents and advocates. We have to stand not just as members of a constituency, a party, a local prejudice, but we have to stand as a member of the union. And as I stand before you today, I can say to you that 99% of what I've taken up in Parliament, it may not have been a lot, but it's not concerned with Sultanpur, it's concerned with the Union of India and my dreams for her. Thank you. I don't want to be asked any of those tough, wonkish questions that you asked Dr. Tharoor.
So, somebody wasn't asked questions
Yeah.
before
The gentleman in the beard.
You mentioned briefly that the electorate is often not interested in questions of policy.
Yeah.
Does that hold, is that because they are not aware as to how it impacts them? So for example, if you were to go to your constituents and tell them about the land acquisition bill,
Yeah.
and say that this means that you get more compensation for your land when it gets acquired or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Or you talk to them about GST and say it will make your filing of taxes simple.
Right.
Does that logic work with constituents if you try and talk to them about bills that are coming?
No, the reason it doesn't is because, let's be honest, right? We're sitting in an air-conditioned hall in New Delhi having these lofty discussions. But the point is, there are 3,000 people farmers who've killed themselves in UP over the last 3 years for debts under 50,000 rupees. So the truth is that when you go to your people who've worked very hard in getting you elected, if you tell them, this is what I'm thinking for you, or this is the thought I want to instill in you, this is not what they're interested in. What they're interested in is what you can do for me, right? So unfortunately, leadership is now a transactional form of enterprise, not a transformational form where your dreams collectively rise. Yeah.
So you talked about the initial time in India where personalities used to come to
Yeah.
Don't you think right now as politics has evolved where people have started taking politics as career options,
Right.
where families have, come into politics from starting to end rather than
What?
other
I don't
countries.
know what you're talking about.
No, in other
I'm
countries.
shocked to hear this.
In other countries, you have, say, a person who's done very good in his
Yeah.
job, even having an opportunity to enter politics. So is that also a cause where people have started to take politics as a career option?
What's your name?
Sir Pradeep, sir.
I think it's an excellent question, and that's, I'll tell you what, I joined politics too early. Because when I joined politics and when I became an MP, I didn't know myself, I didn't know my message, I didn't know my voice, I had no idea what I really stood for. And it took me a long time to figure out who I was as a person, much less what battles I wanted to fight. So you're absolutely right. I have a daughter, a young daughter, and if she said to me, I want to go into politics at the age of 25, I would say, absolutely not. You are to first make your mark in a career, have some life experience, learn some lessons, and then look at preaching them. So yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for sharing the insights that you did. I think it sounded very genuine in what you were saying.
Thank you. I learnt it up well.
I hope it's, I hope it is that way. My questions to you are two. One is that how do you keep yourself motivated in the situations that you pointed out? I think as the gentleman pointed out, it looks like you're stuck in a bad job. Like many of us are in our corporate profiles. So how do you go about motivating yourself? I think making a difference to the world at large. No, I'll tell you how.
It's a very good question.
I think making the difference to the world at large could be one motivating factor, but on a daily basis, being stuck with bureaucracy can be something which is a big challenge, and how do you deal with that? The second question is that people like us who are normal people who vote for people like you, and we expect that you have the powers to make a difference and make a change. Where does the helplessness end? Because it just continues to grow, I think, and from what you said, there does not seem to be an end to it. And where do we see it finally coming to an end and making a difference to the society then?
Okay, so I think the way the helplessness ends is in a very small way. When I became an MP, a few years after that, my grandmother died, my mother's mother. And she left me some money, and she said that I want you to do something good with it. And I thought I'll buy a really big car. But then I thought, okay, no, I'll probably do something better with it. So I went to the farmers in my constituency in Pilibhit, and my mother had represented that constituency a few times before. But I noticed that the farmers were destitute, they were living very sort of lives of depravity. And I said to them, I said, how do we do this? And they said, we don't know, because we do cash crops, because that's what we were taught to do in the Green Revolution. And we sell it to mills who pay us 3 years later, 5 years later, and things like that. And, we have no idea. So we got scientists, I got scientists from Punjab Agricultural University and Pusa Institute, and we took them there, and we paid them. And we didn't do it gratis, because nothing happens through charity. And we paid them for about a year to live there and to work with the farmers. And we got them to make things like iceberg lettuce, and cherry tomatoes, and asparagus, and artichoke, all the things that nobody wants to eat. And then we bought air-conditioned lorries, and then we tied them up with markets like INA and things like that. And today we have created one of the only profit-making cooperatives in UP, and 27,000 farmers are a part of it. I did that. So when my mother was fighting the election from that same constituency this time, I said to her, you're going to have no problem getting elected. And she said, why, what's the combination and things like that. And I said, no, because these people have been directly impacted. We don't need to ask for their vote ever again. And she won by 3 lakh something. So, and we did the same with women, with lace making. Now I'm doing the same in different things. So do I feel hopeless and helpless at times? Yes, a lot of the time. But where do you get your energy from? It sounds like a cliche, but why do you enter this? You enter this to do something, right? To make a change. Because let me be honest, if you're choosing politics as a career, it's one of the worst careers that you can choose. Because you get kicked around from morning to night, you get humiliated, you get false stuff put on you, you spend all your life watching your own back. So if you're doing it for the glory of it, there isn't very much glory there. But if you're doing it because, why do I do it? Because I'm on the right side of advantage in almost every way, right? So if I can, and I feel guilty about this. Shehzad Poonawala is my friend. He's much brighter and much more talented than I am, but he's not in parliament today. Why is he not in parliament today? So the fact is, had he been Shahzad Gandhi, he would have probably been in parliament today. So the fact is that at the end of the day, we have these crosses to bear, and the only way we can get this monkey off our back is to help people, is to what are legacies about? Legacies are not about winning 9 times and being a minister and being prime minister, and that's not what a legacy is about. A legacy is about, my father started Maruti, right? Maruti has given 70,000 crores back to the Indian exchequer. It created 47,000 jobs. That's a legacy. So when I meet people and people say, you know what, your father was a doer, that is what makes me proud. It's not whether he won X election or became X post member. That means nothing to anybody. So if we can do anything as public representatives, for one family, for 1,000, for 1,000,000, that is what makes it all worthwhile. Yeah, sure. Association of Democratic Reforms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to carry the question further to what the lady asked. The general perception, we've heard 3 brilliant talks by 3 MPs, 2 from the opposition and 1 from the ruling party. All of you have said that the requirement which is generally asked by the constituency people is personal in nature. Naukri laga do, ye kar do, wo kar do. My sense of the thing, and I think a large number of people think like this, that our electoral democracy is very vibrant. The elections are held with great fanfare. The people come out to vote and the percentage is increasing. But after that, what happens? So I feel there is a requirement of a bit of a participative type of democracy.
Yeah.
And what can because as a common man, the 70% which we are talking about who are in the rural areas, I'm not talking about the middle class and above who are educated. What do they see you as? They see the MLA and the MP as a person who will get his basics, roti, kapda, makan. So what is the participative type of democracy which needs to be evolved in our country, and what role can you people play? Because over the years we've seen that this roti, kapda, makan business is still going on and people are still dying of hunger or agrarian distress or various other issues.
Yeah, I
So
got it.
That's it. Thank you.
No, it's a very good question, and I think that democracy inherently needs to be completely participative. Just to take what you said forward, when Gandhiji talked about the village being, he said the real India is in her villages. What he really, I think at that time, the difference between that time and now is a village was a complete socio-economic construct, right? It was an end in itself. When we talk about caste, what was caste? It was occupational stratification. When the politicization of caste happened, then people started saying, oh, this work is big and this work is small. I don't want to do this work. So therefore, a cobbler's son would not want to become a cobbler. He would want to become something that he perceived to be better. Now, when we talk about participative democracy, the fact is that Chakshuji said to me the other day, he said, how can somebody who gets elected with 23% of the vote claim to be a representative of that constituency? And he's absolutely right, because the first past the post system, I think, needs to take on a more proportional form, like many countries in Europe that have proportional representation, which I think is a much fairer and more adequate mirror of society. I think that the answer to your question is that people like me need to work at a much more humble level. I think what happens with politics is it's very heady. Once you become an MP, you're surrounded by this coterie of obsequious sycophants who'll come and they'll say, you're God and whatever. But the point is that they are the people who actually make sure you lose the next election, because they apportion all the benefits to themselves and crush the underclass even harder, because they come from there actually and they're aspirational. So I think that the way to do this is my way, maybe different from your way, which is to actually interact a lot more. Like my phone is not with me here out of respect for all of you. But when I go back into my car, I'll probably have 6 or 7 missed calls from people from villages, and I'll call them back and they might say, ye kaam thane mein hai, ya ye kaam wo hai, and that's fine because you said roti, kapda and makan, but what you didn't say was protection. See, most people in our country haven't even reached that roti, kapda and makan phase. What is the phase they're at? Meri raksha karo. I have a fight with my neighbor. He's politically connected. Can you make sure he doesn't, purport atrocities upon me? Right? So that is the basic subsistence, I would say, animalistic level that a lot of people in our country are being forced to live in. That the police harasses people, particularly people from vulnerable sections of society. And ultimately, what happens is that the MP should be a buffer between a post-colonial administration and a Garib Janta. So the way to do this is to work with them on economic and social fronts. For instance, one of the small things that I do, when I go to my constituency, I'll have meetings of officials, of the BDO, of the CO, SO and all those people with the poorest people. So they can actually get their work done, they can put their voice across. What you said, which is the next phase in this evolution, is that you shouldn't have to be there. You should create systems where all this happens on its own. There are socio-economic processes that will have to be undertaken before that happens, but people like me have to be agents for that change. Yeah, please.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
You had
Hi.
briefly spoken about in your speech about the quality or the caliber of members who are getting elected to parliament,
Yeah.
given their notorious history. So given that, do you think India can afford to go into some sort of a primary system for getting, for choosing who you want to stand or who your party wants to field in a particular constituency, to ensure that at least in the primary level, you know, at least your conscience is clear that the people are choosing the person even though he has a notorious past.
Yeah,
That is
the
what
thing
they
is
want
that,
at the end of the day.
there are ways to circumvent all that. So for instance, the idea is good. You can have what you're basically saying is candidates need to be vetted sharper and longer, right? So that you get the best of the lot. But the fact is that in a country like India, where there is a lot of medievalism or post-medievalism even now, the crowding out effect of the weaker people, even in that process, will be very evident. So can it be an idea that's tried? Absolutely. Does it guarantee what you're saying? Perhaps not. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, Ji.
Varun, what you said here, goody nice things, and what you said in 2009, we all know, but I'm not going to ask this question. What my questions are, you mentioned about the problems of the parliamentary functioning, whips, party diktat and everything. But your supreme leader and the country's prime minister, Mr. Modi, who was chosen primarily on the grounds of governance and who claims himself to be the best administrator and governor after at least Chandragupta Maurya. But in the last 2 years, we hardly saw anything.
Not a fan, I guess.
I reserve my answer. But what I'm asking is,
Yeah.
we hardly saw anything, any reforms from his side, the thing that you mentioned about.
Okay, I would like to answer this in 2 ways. I was falsely accused of making statements and cleared by every single court of law in the land today. The UP government had to apologize to me. The Supreme Court Chief Justice of India himself has given a very strong judgment in my favor. So what you said is not only wrong, but it's defamatory. I would urge you not to take that tact with me, number one. And number two, where you've talked about the Prime Minister, and you've said that the Prime Minister dreamt big, but those things haven't really actualized on the ground. I would like to say that I'm here as my own person and not as a representative or a spokesman of somebody else, but I will answer that question by saying this, which is, as Indians, if we indulge in dialogue and debate, it's good and required, right? But the one thing that we also need to do is to have some faith and positivity about those people and give them a little bit of time. I'm not saying, and I'm not defending any particular person or any situation. But what I will say is this, which is, we have a major issue. It is the seminal issue of our times. And I think that, you know, I was, before I came here, I had a meeting with the Singapore ambassador. He had come over. And I said to him, why is Singapore considered a model of good governance in almost every way? And the first thing he said to me was, because its optimal population ratio is the best in the world, other than Greenland and stuff, of course. So the point is that how does one do it? You said parliamentarians need to have small families. I have one child, so, you know. But at the end of the day, look, let's not impose our beliefs on people. Let's try and educate people that their children are an arrow into the future, and therefore what they really need to do is to plan families that can be not just an asset to them, but an asset to the country going forward. But it has to come from education. It cannot come from imposition.